Jaya Gopi Janabhalabha Girivaradhari Jashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Ashtotara Shata Shishimadhi Sivan Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Shila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki ISKCON Founder Acharya Shila Prabhupada Ki Grantara Shimam Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Oh glories to the assembled devotees, oh glories to the assembled devotees, oh glories to the assembled devotees, oh glories to Shishiguru and Shiguranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10. It is Suman Bonon, Chapter 87, the prayers from the personified Vedas, text number 19. Swakrita vichitra yonisho vishon ibahetutaya taratamatas chakashyana lavatsak vatswakrita tunukriti. Atabitata swamusua pitatam tavadamashamam virajati yunujantyapi panyava ekarasham. Swakrita vichitra yonisho vishan ivahetutaya taratamatas chakasyana lavat swakrita nukriti. Atabitata swamushu swabita tantavadamashamam. Virajati yonujantya vipipanyava ekarasam. Sakrita vichitra jonishu vishan iva hetutaya. Taratamattaschakasyanna labat swakrita nukriti. Atabitata swanusuabitatan tavadamashamam. Virajati yonujantya vipipanya eva karasam. Swakrita vitrichat yonishu vishan iva hetutaya. Taratamattaschakasyanna labat swakrita nukriti. Atabitata swanusuabitatan tavadamashamam. Virajati yonujantya vipipanyava ekarasam. Swa, by yourself. Krita, created. Vichitra, variegated. Yonishu, within the species of life. Vishan, entering. Iva, apparently. Hetutaya, as their motivation. Tarata mata, according to hierarchies. Chakasi, you become visible. Analavat, like fire. Swa, your own. Krita, creation. Anukritihi, imitating. Atha, therefore. Vitatashu, unreal. Amushu, among these various species. Avitatam, not unreal. Tava, your. Dhamma, manifestation. Samam, undifferentiated. Viraja, spotless. Dijaha, whose minds. Anujanti, understand. Abhibhipanyava, those who are free from all material entanglements. Pana, ekarasam, unchanging. Translation and purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Apparently, entering among the variegated species of living beings you have created, you inspire them to act, manifesting yourself according to their higher or lower positions. Just as fire manifests differently according to the shape of what it burns. Therefore, those of a spotless intelligence who are altogether free from material attachments realize your undifferentiated, unchanging self to be the permanent reality among all these impermanent life forms. Purport. Actually, it's a very long purport, so I'm going to read and comment on them. So, Om Gyana Timirandasya Gyananjala Shalakaya Chakshur Ummilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Ramapada Swami Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirveshesha Shunyavadi Pashatyade Shatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha. So the purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Here in these prayers of the personified Vedas, in which the Shrutis describe the super soul as entering countless varieties of material bodies, a critic may question how the Supreme can do this without becoming limited. Indeed, proponents of the Advaita philosophy see no essential distinction between the Supreme Soul and his creation. In the impersonalist conception, the Absolute has inexplicably gotten itself entrapped by illusion and thus become first a personal God and then the demigod, humans, animals, plants, and finally matter. Sankaracharya and his followers take great pain to cite Vedic evidence to support this theory of how illusion is imposed on the Absolute. But, speaking for themselves, the Vedas here answer this objection and refuse to lend their authority to the Mayavada impersonalism. The conception of the Mayavadi philosophy is that because the Absolute is impersonal, then forms, any type of form, any type of quality is, in their conception, a product of this material illusion. So, although they may accept that the past tense of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the material world is something that is being documented, the way they deal with that is that because that those past tense and those manifestations of or these personal manifestations of the absolute truth are the product of material illusion, because they have form, they have qualities, they have actions, or there's activities. So those for them are the symptoms of matter, of material illusion. And therefore, they consider that the form of the Lord, the transcendental form of the Lord, is not transcendental, it's actually material. And our Vaishnavacharyas have refuted that in such a powerful way that there is no question of going around with it. Throughout the whole time, it's always been the great personalities, Vaishnavacharyas, establishing this supreme knowledge that the personality of Godhead is the highest um, understanding of the absolute truth. And the fact is that the form of the Lord, his name, his activities, his lila, is transcendental. So it's not of the material quality. So this is something that is constantly being established by the great Vaishnavacharyas in a very powerful manner. They not only present their arguments based on the authorities of the Vedas. In this case, we see the Vedas personified themselves are making this very clear. That ultimately, the highest understanding of the absolute truth is that he is the supreme personality of Godhead. And they not only use the great Vaishnavacharyas, the the authority of the Vedas, but they also establish it through logic, through argument, to reason. They establish all this truth. For example, the question, uh, our Vaishnavacharyas, they make this logical argument that how anyone can explain that the absolute has becoming entrapped by his illusion. What's happening? So anyway, I'm going to continue reading, I guess, because of this distraction. The process of creation is technically called Srishti, sending forth. The Supreme Lord sent forth his variegated energies, and these partake his nature while remaining distinct from him. This fact is expressed in the true Vedic philosophy of Achintya Veda Veda. The inconceivable simultaneous oneness and difference of the Supreme Lord and his energies. Thus, although each of the multiple of individual soul is a distinct entity, all souls consist of the same spiritual substance of the Supreme, since they partake of the Supreme Lord's spiritual essence. The jivas are unborn and eternal, just as he is. Lord Krishna speaking to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra confirms this. Na tvevaham yatuna sham, na tvanne me janadipa, na chaiva na vavishyama, sarve vajam ataparam. Quote, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. End of quote. Bhagavad Gita 2:12. Material creation is a special arrangement for those jivas who choose to separate themselves from the Supreme Lord's service, and thus the creation involves producing an imitation world where they can try to be independent. The whole message of the Bhagavad Gita is to bring one to that proper understanding. In the fourth chapter, Krishna defines transcendental knowledge as, in a nutshell, to understand his position, to understand the position of the living entity, and to understand the relationship that is between the living entity and the Supreme Lord. Transcendental knowledge means to understand Krishna's, specifically transcendental knowledge for the conditioned soul, because it is explained that knowledge is an essential constitution of the living entity, who have the spiritual constitution of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. So knowledge is just an intrinsic part of the living entity. It's essential. It's part of its essence. But when we're in the material world, it is important to reawaken that transcendental knowledge. So one have to cultivate transcendental knowledge. Transcendental knowledge, it is considered to be the weapon to cut the knot of material illusion. And that transcendental knowledge, Krishna defines as to understand the nature of his activities and his appearance in this world. And one have to receive that transcendental knowledge through a devotee of the Lord, a spiritual master. And what do we learn from the spiritual master? That we are Krishnas. Krishna explains that in the Bhagavad Gita. That the spiritual master, being pleased with our sincere, submissive, inquisitive, and service, then he bestowed upon us the understanding that who is Krishna and what is our relationship with Krishna. Later throughout the Bhagavad Gita, it goes even much deeper. What is this transcendental knowledge? In the 13th chapter, much later, after the whole supreme knowledge or highest or the king of all knowledge has been already described, the part is the beginning of the 12th chapter is the end part between the 7th chapter and the 12th chapter, describe the king of all knowledge, which is devotional service to the Lord. And immediately from the 13 to the 18 is a part that dives very deeply into this transcendental knowledge, the jnana part, to understand in much more in a much more deeper way this understanding of Krishna's position, understanding of the position of the living entity, and the relationship between the two. So Arjuna starts the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita by asking 6 questions. He first asks, he wants to know, we go to the 13th chapter. He wants to know about nature and the enjoyer of nature, Prakriti and Purusha. So he say, oh my dear Krishna, I wish to know about Prakriti and Purusha. I want to know about the field of action and the knower of the fields of action. And I want to know what is knowledge. I want to know of knowledge and the object of knowledge. I want to go deeper into this. And these are all very much related. So, and to understand all this, Krishna explained, is all these things are required to be able to obtain the highest goal of life, or to be able to fully understand Krishna, or to be able to fully grasp transcendental knowledge. Or even better to say, because this is a point that is very, very strongly made by our Vaishnavacharyas, that you take all these elements of knowledge and by experience you transform them in realized knowledge. So realized knowledge is what we're looking forward to achieve. Realized knowledge. The term is vijnana. So there's jnana and vijnana. Vijnana is realized knowledge. So in this chapter 13, then Krishna explains that there is the field of activity is the body, and the knower of it's important to understand the field of activity. It's important to understand this material nature, and it's important to understand who is the controller and the enjoyer of material nature, the Supreme Lord. It is important to understand that for us, the field of action is this material body. And the knower of the field of action is the living entity and the super soul. So the understanding of this relationship between the living entity and the super soul, and then knowledge of knowledge then is very interesting, because Krishna goes on to give 20 different principles of knowledge that are more qualities, that are more characteristics or qualities, rather than to be a body of knowledge, but it's more things that are more principles, and such as humility, simplicity, tolerance, respect, surrendering to a spiritual master. All these different 20 elements that are like this. So it's more like to do with your character, with your values, your principles. And he explains that these are the means to experience or to these elements of knowledge are the means to obtain realized knowledge. So they're necessary for obtaining realized knowledge. So by acting within these principles and in conjunction with the instructions of the Vedas, then one can actually understand the object of knowledge, which is Krishna. And he goes to explain about the, the super soul as the object of that knowledge. So through um, this process, this 20, then one comes to to fully understand and enter into contact with the super soul. These 20 are follow: humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid, amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth. Then Krishna goes to say, I should now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. So the knowable is these two, the living entity and the super soul. The knowable, 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 how do you spell? Knowable. Yes. So, so then the living entity, by knowledge, we can fully understand who we are. And at the same time, we can also understand the super soul. Without those 20 principles, not possible. Not possible. So the misconceptions that are there that are due to poor form of knowledge are simply a result of a lack of these principles not to be present. So within the Mayavadi philosophy, then you can see, you can always find this type of faulty principles. Specifically, many of them you can have sometimes Mayavadi sannyasis that they actually austere, they control in their mind, they um, they have tolerance. They display many of these, but there's some points that they're not there, and therefore Krishna explains that all their intelligence, all the pious activities are being taken by illusion. They're being covered by illusion. So this is the important thing. There is a process of knowledge, and there's a process to be able to experience the absolute truth and come to the point of self-realization, of becoming realized, that your knowledge becomes fully realized, or knowledge becomes fully realized. So one thing that is quite um, amazing is that Srila Prabhupada and actually Vaishnavacharyas, they gave us the four regulated principles. Now they're very simple. I mean, you have four. In this instance, chapter 13, Krishna gives 20. In the 8th canto, the Srimad Bhagavatam, Narada Muni gives to Maharaj Yudhishthira about 30 something. So our Vaishnavacharyas, specifically Srila Prabhupada, made it very simple for us. We got 4. And by following these 4, then along with the process of devotional service, one can actually experience and, in fact, become fully understanding of the this transcendental knowledge of Krishna, of who we are, and our relationship with Krishna. The the four regulated principles can be actually how you say when you can unfold a lot of, or you can fit so many of the 20 can fit in a particular regulated principle. So it's like you compact, you know, you can put like a zip folder, you can put several of them in there. And I'll give you an example. Say, for example, truthfulness. Truthfulness is one of the principles. You should not gamble. One of the regulated principles that we make a vow is that we don't gamble. You know, it's a simple thing. In general, some people, like, I never have much attraction for gambling. So, oh, that's easy. I don't, or some people, they come from cultures that are vegetarians, say Indians, they're vegetarians. Oh, sure, easy, no problem. But it's a very simplistic, so under that very simple principle, then actually you can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So what is gambling means? Gambling is when we actually try to obtain something big with something very small, right? You put a small amount, $1, you buy a lotto ticket, and you're trying to earn, you have the hopes to earn millions with that $1 without much work. So what does that mean? Well, I'm cheating in one sense, because that's not my work. That's the work of so many people. So that amount have to come from somewhere. So I'm taking that amount that comes from somewhere, is a cumulative work of so many things, and I'm taking it from me. So it's a cheating propensity. So in reality, gambling is, when you go deeper into gambling, is is a principle that can be applied to so many things. Like, I can gamble about any type of choice that I make. I I'm I I do a bet. I mean, I start a relationship, start a job, have a project, make a decision. Okay, today I'm going to go to such place. It's a you gamble a situation in one sense. If we work like that, if we have a principle that I want with the less effort to gain the most gratification or enjoyment. So it's a type of mentality. It's a type of mentality that is um, part or manifestation of my cheating propensity. One of the faults that the conditioned soul has in this material world is that a conditioned soul have the propensity to be illusion, has imperfect senses, um, have the propensity to cheat, and the fourth one is, I don't remember, imperfect senses, I say, make mistakes. We have the propensity to make mistakes. So the propensity of cheating is there, is ingrained. And therefore, the quality of truthfulness is a quality of knowledge, it's a principle. So you can unfold so much out of that principle. And simply to not gamble is not just not to play the lotto or things like that, but it's actually you expand it into so many things. And you can say the same thing with all the different ones. Not meat eating means that you really have to cultivate compassion, but you can unfold so much out of that. It's not just not eating meat, but it's actually to cultivate the principle of compassion, to cultivate the principle of truthfulness, to cultivate cleanliness. It's not just illicit sex, but it's letting go from engaging in lustful type of activities. And that can be manifested in so many ways. So these principles of knowledge are there, and for us, it makes it very simple. We cultivate the four regulated principles just to create that sort of a strength along with the practice of devotional service. And with that, we can start to understand who we are and start to be in contact with, or to have the capacity of the means to be able to experience the super soul within the heart. And Krishna says that similar to what we're reading today. I'm going to continue reading in a moment. The super soul, this is the 13th chapter. Again, Krishna continues. The super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. Although the Supersoul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one, although he is the maintainer of every living entity. It is to be understood that he devours and develops all. He is the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. So that is what we're receiving through disciplic succession. That is transcendental knowledge, and that is something that is constantly, strongly established through the Bhagavatam and through the Bhagavad Gita. So I'll read to the end and then we can discuss. After creating many species of material life, the Supreme Lord expands into his own creation as a super soul in order to provide the intelligence and inspiration every living being needs for a day-to-day existence. Krishna says in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita the same thing. The famous, Sarvasya Shaham, Hridisani Visto, that he is situated in everyone's heart, and Matas Smriti Gyanan Apohanan Cha, that he gave remembrance and forgetfulness to each entity according to their desires. He inspires. He gives that. He enters into everyone to actually, and not only what is wonderful, it's not only that he's talking here about human beings, it's any species of life. From the demigods to an ant, the Lord from within the heart inspires the living entity to perform actions. You ever wonder, you never see an ant in the space, but you put sugar and you're going to have ants somehow, they're appearing in there. So how in the world this ant, in this vast space, figured out that there's sugar that was dropped in the floor? Super soul. Super soul directs. Well, one may say, yeah, but they're so tiny. What is that? A super, perceptive thing? Super soul. Yeah. As stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad 2.6.2, quote, after creating this world, he then entered within it. End of quote. The Lord enters the material world, however, without forming any binding connection to it. This the Shruti is here declared by the phrase Vishan Eva, quote, only seeming to enter. Tara Tamatas Chakashi means that the Paramatma enters the body of every living being, from the great demigod Brahma down to the insignificant germ, and exhibit different degrees of its potency according to each soul's capacity for enlightenment. Analavat Swakritanukritti, just as fire ignites in several objects, burns according to the different form of those objects, so the Supreme Soul entering the bodies of all living creatures illuminates the consciousness of each conditioned soul according to his individual capacity. Even in the midst of material creation and destruction, the law of all creatures remains eternally unchanged, as expressed here by the word Eka Rasam. In other words, the Lord eternally maintained his personal form of immeasurable, unalloyed spiritual pleasure. The rare living beings who completely habitas disengage themselves from material dealings or pana, thereby becoming abhi panyava, come to know the Supreme Lord as he is. Every intelligent person should follow the example of these great souls and beg from them the chance to also be engaged in the Supreme Lord's devotional service. So that's our great fortune, that somehow or other we have taken the shelter of such personality as Srila Prabhupada. This prayer is recited by the Shrutis, whose mood is similar to that expressed in the following mantra of the Sweswatara Upanishad 6:11. Quote, the one Supreme Lord lives hidden inside all created things. He pervades all matter and sits within the hearts of all living beings. As the indwelling supersoul, he supervises their material activities. Thus, while having no material qualities himself, he is the unique witness and giver of consciousness. Srila Siddhar Swami submits his own prayer. Quote, let us worship the Supreme Lord who enters the products of his own creation, yet remains aloof from the superior and inferior material gradations. He is a pure, undifferentiated existence pervading everything. So, it's important then to um, embrace the process of transcendental knowledge. It's important to um, not only embrace it, but fully accept it. The way Krishna puts it is this way: you have to let go. You have to let go the different ideas that we have of how we can navigate this material world. Ideas that we may have come out through our experiences, through things that were transmitted to me or imposed upon me or given to me through my education, my ordeals. All of those things, all of those different conceptions that we have of what we're supposed to do, what we want to do, or what we need to do, we have to let go. And it's not something harsh when we understand that, or when we come to understand that as we pursue happiness in this world, then when we analyze, we can come to the conclusion that is not working very well. If I am actually objective about taking an assessment of um, how successful I am in being happy, peaceful, self satisfied, how I'm progressing and elevating myself. When I take an assessment and see that, yes, actually, no, why am I suffering? Why all these things are happening? Then we can come to understand that um, we have to find an alternative, that this is not working. And when we come to devotional service by the mercy of Guru and Krishna, and we place with a system that Krishna, the personality of Godhead, is giving us, He is telling us, just do it. Just do this. Just embrace it, accept it, and do it exclusively. Follow Krishna's system, the system of knowledge, the system of how to cultivate the principles of knowledge and how to become realizing that knowledge. That is called the principle of vidya. Vidya. When we study the books, um, the Bhakti Shastras, one of them is a Sri Ishupanishad, and the Sri Ishupanishad makes this differentiation about these two things, vidya and avidya. Vidya is knowledge, avidya is ignorance. Ignorance is the source of all miseries. Vidya is transcendental knowledge. The understanding of vidya as per the Ishupanishad is to understand again Krishna's position, our position, and our relationship. In terms of understanding by the Ishupanishad perspective, Krishna's position, he is the owner, the controller of everything. And in terms of our relationship, he is providing us. He provides and maintains us. He gave us a quota that is perfect and complete for each one of us. And when we accept that quota and we serve him uh, with devotion, then we can live happy. And not only being happy in this life, but actually elevate ourselves to the point that we can go back home, back to God. So this is the process of knowledge. And right here, the Vedas personified is telling us about it. Any comments or questions?
Thank you for your class, Prabhuji. I just wanted to share. I once heard, I guess, in class or something, that gambling is anything other than pursuing Krishna consciousness is considered gambling.
Is considered what?
Anything other than pursuing Krishna consciousness is considered gambling.
Gambling.
I once heard. Yeah. And then it's too much stuff to really, but there's just so much stuff involved in the things that you were speaking of. Yeah, I'll just stick with that. The gambling. Oh, and that seems like that's why it's very important to have the guidance of a spiritual master to be able to um, understand these things.
Yeah, yeah, that is a very good point. Yeah, thank you. Turn it on, Carl.
Question. So, does gambling also include any situation where you're taking like a unnecessary risk? Like, say, say if I had a person had a spiritual master and the spiritual master told him to do A, B, and C, but the person's like, oh, I think I have a better way of doing it. Is that considered gambling?
Yeah, in one sense, you can stretch it like that. Yeah, yeah. When you, it's almost like you're taking you betting on your own wit, you know, and so it's just like gambling. You can, you have all these different possibilities. Maybe you'll be able to, you know, succeed or not. So you gambling on that. Yeah. When when you do that, when you bet on your own wheat, then you're responsible for the consequences. The consequences are gonna give you either a possibility of distress or a possibility of some achievement, some happiness. So you either gonna have to be suffering or enjoying. So you're gonna be responsible for that. When you take Krishna's system, then there is no the you don't have to be the whole thing changed, the whole game changed. Also, you're going to go as a devotee through different experiences of distress or happiness or this and that. You still experience that, but both both that happiness and that distress are instrumental for bringing you to a higher stage of understanding, of realization, of peacefulness and happiness. It's something like this. If you're sick, if you're sick, you can don't go to a doctor, just live with it. And then you live with it and you have to suffer. So you go to suffering, you go through these different things, and you may not, um, um, you may continue your life and enjoy this way, and then at the end, suffer. So, and you don't do much about it, and you still go through the suffering. If you do go to a physician, go to a Chinese doctor or an Ayurvedic doctor and do some treatment. And then you go and still through the treatment, because you're sick, you're going to suffer. While taking your medicine, you're still suffering. But with each moment of that suffering that the medicine causes, you're getting stronger and stronger and stronger. On the other hand, if you don't follow the doctors, then you're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. in the suffering. So the two sufferings are quite different. One suffering is is a symptom that you're getting better and better and better. The other one is that you're getting worse and worse and worse. So so that's the difference when we don't gamble. We take the secure, you know, route of being in the shelter of Guru and Krishna. One, taking decisions and doing the things. So it's quite a difference. It's actually, you can go deeper and deeper in the things, but that's the important. Charging.
Of this point that you were raising, that if you're following some simple principles that are given, and you were using the example of not gambling or not eating meat, and that by following that you're actually gaining knowledge, because the knowledge comes with, if it's a case of not eating meat, the knowledge comes that, oh, I'm sparing the life of some creature. So that knowledge then, as you were saying, everything builds up. So I'm sparing the life of that creature. Actually, that means that I'm actually showing some kindness or some caring towards other living creatures. So, so I guess those 20 items of knowledge that were listed there in the 13th chapter, they're the result of a kind of cultivation of following even the four simple principles, although you had said that there in some sense are also principles to follow, but it seems that the regulative principles are like injunctions: don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and don't do this. And then knowledge is coming from following that, don't do this. But it seems the items of knowledge are the ones that are coming as a result of following some basic injunction. So I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, I think it is, you make it in such a way for you start, it's like very elementary type of level. When we make these vows of simple, don't meat eating, don't gambling, no intoxication, and that when you restrain yourself of doing on a very gross level activities that are contrary to those principles of knowledge, then you, and along with the practices of devotional service, the purifying practices of devotional service, then you can go on a much higher level of consciousness, and then start to understand that actually the principles, these are the no, these are the don'ts, the you know the rules and regulations. You don't do this, but the principle that you're upholding is the principle of truthfulness, and that now opens oh into a whole. Now you're talking about a, 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 a character principle. So what does it mean to be truthful? What does it mean to be clean? What does it mean to be austere and this type of thing? Compassionate. And you may start on a very simplistic level, and then as you go on, then it have much greater implication. compassionate with non-violence, ahimsa. What does it mean? Then, Prabhupada, and we studying, we practicing devotional service, and we studying the scriptures. Prabhupada explains that this ahimsa is not just not committing violence to others, but it's also violence to do, it's not just physical, but also violence um, from the mental and emotional. And then you have violence of the spirit. So it's all kinds of things that you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then when you go into this 20 on 30, a much more expansive list of elements of knowledge, then you can see, oh, okay, so it's much more greater, the cultivation of these qualities. These are means of obtaining, of realized knowledge, to experience knowledge. That's what is being explained. Jai. Grantarashman Bhagavatam ki jai. Shila Prabhupada.